Welcome. Welcome to the 4th annual ASPO-USA conference. My name is Debbie Cook. I'm the mayor of Huntington Beach, California. By California standards, Huntington Beach is a small town in the Los Angeles mega region. By Alaskan standards, it's almost 2/3 or 1/3 of their population. Perhaps I have a job opportunity ahead of me. Before I go further, I would like to invite up all of the ASPO board members and the planning committee. I'd like to introduce them. So if they could all kind of walk up here and stand on the side of the stage. We've never done that before, and I think it's about time after 4 years you kind of put a face to a board. We Californians like to think that we're the leaders in the nation. Sure, we were the first to pass a global greenhouse gas emission reduction bill, but we certainly can't get a budget out of our house across the street. But one of the things we are certainly not the leaders in is oil production. We rank 3rd in the country in oil production. We produce approximately 218 million barrels of oil every year, and we consume over 700 million barrels of oil. And in the last 20 years, we've seen that cut in half. This is my 4th ASPO-USA conference. I don't seem to be able to get enough of this stuff. I like to tell people I'm not peaked out yet. I'm just peaked off. I'm one of those obsessed peaked off women who is trying to make a difference in the United States. I'd like to introduce real quickly the board. We have Dick Lawrence, Ron Swenson, Rick Block. John Theobald was instrumental in planning this event because he's at UC Davis and he was our local guy on the ground. And we have Sally Odland, Maury Wolfson, Steve Andrews, and Randy. Of course, Randy's always standing in the back, but we know he shines. So thank you all so much for making this a possibility. But most importantly, thank you for inspiring me. I'd also like to introduce all of you to each other. So it's always interesting to see what a diverse group we have here. And if just by a show of hands, well, first I'd like to know if you're an elected official, if you would please stand up so we could recognize that there are good elected officials who understand energy. Do we have? There we go. Thank you. If you work in government, if you would please raise your hand if you work in government. Any kind of agency. See, it's good. That's great. How about nonprofits, nonprofit area? Lots of nonprofits. How about the media? Lots of media covering it this year. And industry. Lots of industry people. And then you came because you're interested in peak oil. There you go. Education. Oh, education. I'm sorry. How can I leave out education? So it's a very diverse group. I hope you'll all get to know as many people as you can here because they're often such a tremendous resource. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Steve Andrews, the co-founder of ASPO.
Thanks, Debbie. A second welcome to you all. We have a full agenda and a lot of great speakers, and we appreciate your showing up on time. One of the things I'm going to point out is that each session will start with a video clip going forward. We're in the state where we celebrate Hollywood, and so we have video clips from Syriana and a number of Good Will Hunting and 3 Days of the Condor and so on. In fact, it was a legitimate invitation to Robert Redford to join us for tomorrow night, and John Theobald and Randy Udall almost pulled that off, but he had a date conflict and couldn't make it. So get back here for those video clips. One of John Theobald's students done a great job of assembling some, pulling some of the best ones. As some of you heard yesterday in the financial session, we are clearly, as Jim Paplava said to me on the phone, we are clearly in the middle of the financial crisis of his lifetime. And as moderator of that panel, Rick Schechter said, we're witnessing a near catastrophe. Randy has a more mild way of putting it that he's been using for an awful long time that is really shining pretty bright now. He says, everyone knows that prosperity is at risk from the peak oil reality. Right now, the peak oil reality is getting shouted down pretty harshly. So, but our mission in the next couple of days is to still focus on that story and try to see how it interweaves with the difficulties we're facing in the financial markets today. There's clearly an interaction there. Some administrivia. We will have an evening reception from right after when the last speaker ends until 6:30. We will then have an evening session in here from 6:30 to 7:30. This evening it's an interview with Randy Udall is one of the interviewees, along with Jim Kunstler and Dennis Hayes. And Richard Brenny will be doing the interviewing. Tomorrow evening we'll have some of the luminary speakers from across the 2 days who will field your questions. Probably six of our panelists will try to pick up and answer any of the questions that you have remaining. There will be 3.5 by 5 cards on each table. We will be picking up questions so that we can get through them as quickly as we did last night. If we avoid kind of speeches by the audience, the speakers can really address a lot of questions, as you heard. I encourage you to put your name down on this if you'd like your question to be associated with you personally. A couple other things. At lunchtime, we have to literally evacuate this place. That takes 15 minutes to set up. So when we break just before lunch, we all need to exit the room. 15 minutes later, after your break, you'll be able to come back in and we'll start with the lunch and events and food. I want to mention something that ASPO-USA coordinated this year, earlier in the year, and that is a modest $100,000 bet with the Cambridge Energy Research Associates. We're going to update that bet and clarify it. There was some confusion about it in the media. But we are challenging CERA on their assumption that in the year 2017, as it was printed in January of this year, that the world oil productive capacity will be 112 million barrels a day from today's 86. Well, it might be 90 today. If you could turn on the taps everywhere, I believe they call it 91. Tell that to the folks in Nigeria. So we will be challenging them. Look for an announcement about that. It'll probably be, we don't believe we'll get to a real, forget the capacity. We don't believe we'll get to 100 million barrels a day by the year 2017 that they picked out. So please look for that. If you have a cell phone, and I heard a few in the audience last night, now would be a really good time to put it on stun. Really good time. Please take a moment, reach down, get that good friend of yours silenced. Everyone, your neighbors would appreciate it. Finally, I really want to acknowledge the positive energy in the room last night and yesterday afternoon, and look for much more of the same. It's an extraordinary opportunity for us all to interact and to not only listen to good speakers, challenge them, as was the case last night, learn from them, buttonhole them in the hallways. It's just a wonderful opportunity. We appreciate both your speakers, our speakers, and the and your participation. I forgot one final thing. This event wouldn't be possible without sponsors. About a third of the cost of this event is covered by sponsors. You saw the list of them up there earlier, but let me read them out for you. Pubco and M. Gottlieb and Associates are our headline sponsors for this event. Growing Grace, Bowen Energy, Simmons & Company International, IEM Inc., Sacramento Municipal Utility District, Smiley Oil, Tahoe Valley Lines, Post Peak Advisors, TerraCord LLC, who's also our conference support team, and they do a great job for us every year. all 4 years. And finally, CORE, the Community Office of Resource Efficiency. So please thank our sponsors. Now I'd like to introduce, it's a real pleasure to introduce Kjell Aleklett. He is the president of ASPO International and the co-founder of the original ASPO. It wasn't called ASPO International or ASPO Ireland or ASPO-USA when it was formed back in 2002 with a first kickoff conference of 65 people in a lecture hall at Uppsala University, Sweden, where he presides as a professor of physics. Dick Lawrence and I were lucky enough to be there, and Matt Simmons, and we have all worked together to pull the cart down the trail here. Kjell is professor of physics at Uppsala in Sweden and leader of the Global Energy Systems Research and the Uppsala Hydrocarbon Depletion Study Group. He holds a doctorate degree from the University of Gothenburg, Sweden, and has worked as a postdoctoral staff scientist for a number of years at the National Science Laboratory at Studsvik in Sweden. His full bio is online. Rather than take up much of his time reading a bio, let me just bring him to the microphone and have him share his remarks. Please welcome Kjell Aleklett.
So, how do I get my, can I get my presentation? I think it's down there.
Down here.
Okay.
Do you see it? Which one is it?
Oops. This one. Okay. So restart it. Yeah. I'd like to congratulate the organizer of this conference to a great conference. It's always interesting to be around people that thinks that peak oil is great. Sometimes we think it's so great we don't see the problems, so I will take some of the problems later on also. Well, some people has problem with pronouncing my first name, and I used to say, if you can pronounce that oil company's name, then you can pronounce my name. I'm Kjell. And that's, of course, kind of a coincidence, but it's quite interesting. Today, this is a very special day for me also to be here in Sacramento, because it's more exactly 30 years ago, in September in 1978, I was in Sacramento the first time, because I was invited to Berkeley by Nobel Prize winner Glenn Seaborg to work as a postdoc in his group, and of course it's fantastic to be in this surroundings. But now I should talk about ASPO and ASPO International, and I also give you some background to the organization, because it might be interesting to know that. Colin Campbell was the one that started it off, and here is some text that you probably can see later on the presentations and so on. What he said, it started that someone in Germany said he should try to make some kind of organization about the fact that we are running out of oil in the future. And I would say that a very critical moment was in October 2001, because Colin had been written his newsletter from January 2001, and I called him and he discussed, and he said, well, Kjell, he said, I think there will be nothing about ASPO. I will write my newsletter to the end of the year, and then I will quit, he said. And I said, come on, we had to discuss this. So I flew over to Ireland, and I said, as a professor at Uppsala University, I can organize a workshop. So let's at least make one ASPO workshop and see what's happening. And well, this is from the meeting. And Steve Andrews is there. You see the back of his hair up in the corner there. But it's very nice that you and Dick was there, and it was a great thing. I would say that Bruce Stanley from the Associated Press, he is the first journalist that is using the word peak oil. Because King Hubbard never used the term peak oil, because it was Colin Campbell that changed the term, the wording, that the oil peak. He thought ASOP was not a nice word, so he said we change this and call it ASPO, the oil peak oil instead. And that was the first time the word peak oil was used. And this article, by the way, was sent around the world, so when Matt Simmons came back to Houston on Saturday morning, he could read about on the front page that he had been in Uppsala and spoke about peak oil. So from that on, peak oil term is used. And it's also interesting to know that from a press release in 2002, we gave this number, that 87 million barrels per day was the peak, and we are about that now. So we were quite right 6 years ago. 2006, it was decided that ASPO, that has been more or less a group of people, 25 people in Europe, should be international. And now we are a network of international ASPO groups. And here we see that the official ASPO groups around the world, and you see the dots all over. I will not mention all the names, but we have all the way to New Zealand, we have in China, we have, of course, in US, Mexico, Argentina, and it's coming more and more groups around the world. So the ASPO family is spreading. And this is some of the logotypes that you can find around the world. And it's a lot of people working with the problem of peak oil. Peak oil, I would say, is a fact of reality. King Hubbard, he made a theory how to try to explain when we can have a peak in the oil production. But peak oil is a fact of reality. And Colin Campbell has made this definition of peak oil. And the maximum rate of production of oil in any area under consideration, recognizing that the final natural resource is subject to depletion. So depletion is the key word for ASPO. Ordinarily, the work that Colin do, the work that we do, is the depletion. And last year, James Schlesinger said these words at the meeting international meeting in Cork. He said, "You are no longer the beleaguered small minority of voices crying in the wilderness. You are now the mainstreams, and you can declare victory." And I think that is a great statement, and we should put it out so people understand that there are even some politicians that know what it's all about. We are facing an inconvenient truth about oil, and it's running out, it's depletion. And this is a historical moment. It's one shot in the arm. I mean, you will get it once, and then it's over. And we are now on the top of this shot, and we are kind of very much addicted to what we get from the oil shock. The problem for US, I think, is this one, that you have super tankers. 2 million barrels is normally in super tankers. And the United States needs 5 of those tankers to arrive to harbors every day, all the year round. That's a problem, because it's coming from someplace outside the United States. And that means US is an importer, and an importer must have an exporter. And that is also a problem, because the exporters in the future will not be able to export as much as they do today. China is another problem, I would say. And you see, Daking is the great oil field in China. I was there recently. They defined very precisely what it's all about when it comes to oil. They are saying petroleum has a compact relationship with the country's political, economical, and military strength. No question about it, straight out. And I think that is reality. You can see at the economic strength, you see how much money you can make per person and how much oil you use. And you see up in the right corner, you have United States using more oil than many other, and you are also the richest country. And down in the left corner, we have the people using not so much oil, and they're not making money. And of course, making money, you need to have oil for that. And that's very clear when you see for China, for instance. So the problem about import is that US has to face the fact that they are not the only one that like to import oil. China likes in the future to import as much oil as the United States do. And one of the exporters, Norway, for instance, its production will just go down the drain, and they cannot export oil in the future. And other things is of importance, the power, the energy is the power. And this is the situation. You have the fossil fuels around the world, and you see US, Russia, and China, the big superpowers in some way or another. And you see that the only one superpower that has enough oil and natural gas to support themselves, and that is Russia. And there's another power that we will see in the future. They are the only one that can be independent. All other is dependent to have import. And this is talking about power. They will get power from that. In the future, we have to see if Russia can export oil. There are scenarios about how much oil it is, but it looks like by 2030, at least one half of the export they have today will be gone, maybe even more. And Saudi Arabia, well, many people are talking about Saudi Arabia. Our estimation is that the production is probably around 7 million barrels per day in year 2030, but I don't have to go into that. The real problem, as I see it in the future, is Africa. No one is talking about it. But this is the future production profile of oil in Africa, and you see it going up to a peak and going down. But the thing is that Africa needs its oil for itself. It needs to increase the consumption of oil because otherwise they can not get any economical strength at all. If Africa cannot keep their oil, they will go down the drain in principle. And we are now lifting the oil from Africa for our benefits, and no one is discussing it. It's the biggest robbery in history that we have seen, and it's going on without anyone writing about it. We have made scenarios as everyone else, and we have a worst case and the best case, and you see the worst case is plateauing out. And that is exactly what we see now when it comes to the oil production. But we should remember what the oil industry is saying. This is ExxonMobil. They are saying the decline in existing oil fields is something between 4 and 6%. And that means we require new production. And they even put the new production in red colors, red numbers. And no one look at this in reality. They're saying it, okay? Of course, they say it because they need to be safe when they will be prosecuted for not telling the truth, as someone will do at some point. The decline from existing production today down to 2012 is this line down. This is what we need to fill with new production, and I don't think the industry will do it. And if you'd like to discuss this more, you're all welcome to the ASPO-USA conference in Barcelona. It's the World Trade Center, and go into the webpage, and I hope as many as you can come to Barcelona because I think it will be a great conference. We will look at the peak oil from the international point of view, and I'm very much welcome you all to Barcelona. As an end point, I'd like to say that we should listen to King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. I think he would know. He said, the oil boom is over and will not return. All of us must get used to a different lifestyle. If he say that, okay, we should listen to that. And what I'm saying is that we are passing the peak, and we need to build a crash mat. And that is what we had to do in the near future, to build this crash mat. And as you see, when passing the peak, he looks quite surprised. But he is lucky, there is a crash mat. It might not be that in the future if we not start to work now. And I would like just to say, when you do these things work, you need to have a lot of students. And this is my research group in Sweden. We are 9 persons at the university level working on peak oil. And I would say that you have mentioned a bet before, but I have a real bet, and that is with Tony Howard from BP. And we were at the same conference, and then he said to me, I bet that the oil production 10 years from now will be higher than today's production. And we defined that later to be 86.5 million barrels per day. And I asked him, how high is the bet? And he said, well, the price of a barrel at that time. And then I said, well, I accept the bet. And then I added, I hope you understand that I have to make this public. And he looked at me and said, long silence. And then I think he was thinking, what should I do? And I said, okay, I accept it. So I have a bet with the CEO or BP about the production of oil 10 years from now. And I hope the price of oil is very high at that time, because that will make me some money. Thank you very much.
Hello, and welcome to the Day 1 Demand and Supply session of our conference. I'm Sally Odland on the ASPO board and a reformed geologist. I left the industry in 1989 when the domestic production in the U.S. pretty much folded with $10 oil. I have the pleasure today to, we'd like to start today with fundamentals, to actually look at geology in a very basic way, at oil exploration, oil production. The clip you just saw was an example of a gusher and the easy oil in a way. A more realistic clip might have been from There Will Be Blood, but we thought that was a really lousy way to start a conference. So I would like to start out by introducing our distinguished panel of speakers here. We have Professor Ken Verosub from the University of California at Davis, who's a distinguished professor of geophysics. His specialty is paleomagnetism, and he's also he's an expert in the history of the paleomagnetic reversals that have mapped the seafloor spreading. And he will be giving an introductory lecture, an undergraduate Petroleum 101 lecture. Some of you are already well up to speed, and for you it'll be a refresher. The rest of you can consider it a primer, and I think you'll find it very entertaining. Our second speaker today, Gilbert, was unable to come. He took ill, and his doctor is not letting him fly right now. He is an Alaska geologist who has the distinction of having sat the discovery well of Prudhoe Bay and worked the North Slope since 1966, I think, or 64. Anyway, worked the North Slope for 40 years, and he was going to give you a talk on the discovery and a little bit about ANWR and NPRA. He has sent his whole slideshow, which will be posted on our website afterwards, and he's asked me just to give a few of his conclusions. And then we'll conclude with Jeremy Gilbert, who many of you know from our past conferences, currently the head of Barrelmore Limited, but known and loved by all of us as the former chief of petroleum engineering at British Petroleum. And he will be talking, well, he'll be giving us an American wake-up call and looking at the general, the state that you just, that Kjell started on. I would like to point out that geology and oil exploration is more than rocks and oil and tools. Even with the best tools, finding geology requires an active act of imagination. It really requires being able to envision a substance below the surface, eons past. I would like to give a quote that Gilbert always closes his emails with, this quote from John McPhee, who wrote an outstanding 5-volume set called Annals of the Former World. And that is that geologists inhabit scenes that no one ever saw, scenes of global sweep, gone and gone again, including seas, mountains, rivers, forests, and archipelagos of aching beauty, rising in volcanic violence to settle down quietly and forever disappear, almost disappear. It's the fact that they only almost disappear that allows us to reconstruct these paleodepositional environments and the burial histories and the thermal maturation histories and find the structures and actually bring that oil to the surface and get it to you. I'd like to turn the program over to Professor Verosub. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. If we could just get the slide up. Okay. And maybe get the lights out of my eye. That would be helpful. Okay, so if you grew up in the East Coast and are of a certain age, you might remember a company called Sinclair Oil. I actually think they still exist in Indiana or something like that. I am of that age, and I grew up on the East Coast, and Sinclair Oil always had this dinosaur as its logo, and in fact they got to a point where they used to get these big papier-mâché dinosaurs and drag them around the country on trailers. And so I grew up believing that oil came from dead, rotten dinosaur guts. Then a lot of other things happened, and eventually I got to be a geologist or geophysicist, and I learned that that wasn't true. I also put this slide up because there was a time when it was $1.09 a gallon for unleaded gasoline. Anyhow, so how do you make oil? Oil, in fact, doesn't come from dinosaurs. It comes from small marine organisms that live in the sea, microorganisms, foraminifera and coccolithophores and things like that. These little tiny microscopic organisms float around in the ocean, and when they die, they fall to the bottom, and their bodies or their organic material gets incorporated into what's called a source rock. Generally, it's a mud or something like some kind of fairly fine-grained material. Eventually, those bodies decay, so it's dead, rotten microorganisms that produce oil, and that oil forms in that source rock. But if it just stays in the source rock, it doesn't actually produce anything that's economically useful or that's economically accessible. And so what you need is that on top of the source rock, you need something else to be deposited where these little tiny microscopic droplets of oil or organic material can slowly migrate and collect. So you need something that's fairly porous. So typically a reservoir rock would be something like a sand, or in some cases it's a carbonate coral reef. But there are different kinds of formations that allow this material to migrate and then collect. But that's not enough, because if it just migrated into the reservoir, it would then migrate up through the reservoir and escape. So on top of that, you need another kind of rock that actually caps or holds the material within the reservoir. So you need this particular sandwich. You need a source rock, a reservoir rock, and a cap rock in order to even hope to produce any oil from the sediment, providing you have the right kind of sediment. And then, in addition, that whole package needs to be deformed to form what are called traps. I can't see my slide. to form traps, which are places where the oil will actually pool so that you could put a drill in and access it. So all of these different processes and all of this whole entire sequence of events has to occur in order for oil to form. Okay, but that's not the end of the story, because you also need sort of what I call the Goldilocks part of the story. And that is, you've got to take this package and cook it. And you've got to cook it through the heat in the heat of the earth, but you don't want it to be too hot, because if you make it too hot, then all of the oil and gas will just go, all of the organic material will just oxidize and disappear. If you make it too cold, it's not going to form at all. So it just has to be just right. In other words, the temperatures and pressures in the earth have to be within what is called the oil window. So again, there's another very specific sequence of events that needs to occur. And the other thing that you've probably figured out is that this does not happen overnight. You can't make oil in 50 years or in 10 years or in 7 years when we are probably going to be at peak oil if we aren't already there. This takes, in many cases, millions of years. This is the Ventura anticline, which contains one of the youngest known oil reservoirs, and it has a 1 million year old volcanic ash layer in it. So the process takes a long time. Most oil comes from rocks that are hundreds of millions of years old. So it doesn't happen overnight, which is why it is clearly a non-renewable resource, at least non-renewable in our lifetime and in the lifetime of current modern civilization. Okay, so the oil then has to form it has to collect in traps, and then people can put wells in above and tap into those traps where there are pools of oil that can be pumped out and used to produce oil. Now, one of the simplest kinds of traps, or one of the simplest geologic settings in which oil was found, was what's called a salt dome. This is a layer of salt that originally existed in the earth, and the salt is actually less dense than the surrounding rock, so the salt begins to rise up through the layers above it. And as it rises up, it deforms some of those layers, and if those layers contain the right sequence of rocks, then that produces a trap or a set of traps, and those traps can then be tapped for oil. And in fact, in the Gulf Coast, much of the early oil came from these salt domes. And finding the salt domes, in some cases, was fairly easy. You go out in the marshes of Louisiana, and because the salt is buoyant and is pushing the rock up, in some cases, like this Avery Island dome, it actually the dome itself sticks up a little bit above the swamp, and you can fly over it, identify the dome, put a drill rig on it, and drill, which is why this is one of the earliest sources of oil in the Gulf Coast. In other places, the domes are not clear from the surface. And so in order to find the domes, what people had to do is go out and do remote sensing, and the earliest methods in many cases were gravity. Because the dome has a lower density, there's a very slight gravity anomaly. You go out and measure the gravity very, very carefully over this area, and wherever you have a salt dome, you get this bullseye pattern of a change in the gravity, and that identifies the location of the salt dome. But not all the oil was found in salt domes, and people needed another way to look down into the earth. And the way they did that is using what's called seismic reflection or reflection seismology. You put energy into the ground, that produces waves that go down, they bounce off of different geologic layers, and then you have a set of devices that pick up those waves. Excuse me, devices that are typically called geophones. The original geophone arrays consisted of maybe 8 or 10 or 20 geophones. The source was originally a hammer in some cases, hitting the ground or hitting a metal plate. Then people got a little more sophisticated. They started setting off explosions to produce this. And now things have gotten much more sophisticated. There are trucks that are called thumper trucks. These are huge trucks. They have a metal plate between the front and the back wheels. The metal plate is put down in contact with the ground, and then all of that equipment above it vibrates the plate. And that puts energy into the ground, and then people put out geophone arrays, not 10 or 20, but sometimes not hundreds of thousands, but tens of thousands of geophone arrays spreading over many, many miles. So these trucks will go along, shake the ground, the geophones will pick it up, then the trucks will advance a little bit, do it all over again. These are big, complex, time-consuming surveys that require an awful lot of computer processing. But we now have that kind of capacity, and so this is done. And you can also do it at sea. There's an equivalent of a geophone that you can drag, you can mount in an array and drag behind a boat. And then you also drag something else on the boat that uses a sound source to produce that impulse of energy that then goes down and comes back up. So with all of this technology, it's possible to image what's down inside the earth. And that's now typically what's used. It's been used for many, many years to do petroleum exploration. And here is just one cross-section that was produced. And if you have some information about the area, you can start looking for structures in the ground that are likely to produce oil. If you strike oil in one place, then you can look for analogous structures nearby that might also contain oil. Can I have some water, please? This has gotten even more sophisticated, and so much of the seismic work that is done now, thank you, is done not using two-dimensional but three-dimensional seismic data. They spread out these arrays in a grid, and they use again, with the kind of computing power we now have, they can actually produce three-dimensional diagrams. You can actually project, in many cases, in some of the large companies, they project all of this into a room, and you can put on goggles and put on gloves and walk in and move around within the geologic formation, looking for the signs of the things that are likely to produce oil. So this is a very sophisticated game. It's a very sophisticated business. A lot of time and effort has gone into it. There's a lot of geologic input because you need to be able to understand what it is you are seeing when you see a diagram like this. And this is a tremendous effort that has gone into it. It's paid off. We have found a lot of oil. But as time goes on, the methods have had to become more and more sophisticated because all the easy stuff was found. And so every time it looks like they were running out, they needed to come up with more and more sophisticated methods to find what turned out to be less and less oil. Okay, the take-home message from this is that oil forms under special conditions. It takes time to form. There's only so much of it. It isn't easy to find, and most of all of the easy oil has been found. Okay, now what happens when you find some oil, you put in, where you think you found oil, you put in a well, you drill, and you find oil? This is what the production from one single well will look like, okay? There's some ramp-up time as you're getting it online, and then you pump at a constant rate for some period of time, and then you pump it away. You start to pump it out, and so the production tends to decrease. That's one single well. If you have an oil field, and you have lots of wells, each well will have a curve that looks like the curve I showed you, and if you take a bunch of those curves, and add them all up, you get the black line that you see, which is the production curve for an oil field. And you get this thing that looks kind of sort of like a bell-shaped curve, like a Gaussian curve. And the person who really first identified this, who put it all together, was M. King Hubbard, who, as we all know, is the father of the Hubbard curve. And what he said is, well, to a pretty good approximation, any oil field is going to follow more or less a bell-shaped curve. And not only that, if you take a bunch of bell-shaped curves and add them together with different heights and different time scales, what you get is more or less a bell-shaped curve. And in 1956, which is where the red line is, Hubbard took the production from the United States, U.S. total oil production, which are the black dots to the left of the red line, and he fit the blue curve to that and predicted that in 1971 we would reach peak oil production. Well, the black dots show you what happened in the United States in the subsequent 50 years. And okay, production was a little bit higher at the peak than he predicted, but more importantly, he had the general shape, he had the peak time correct, and I guess most importantly, he actually predicted the depletion of U.S. oil resources. Okay, now in addition to production following a bell-shaped curve, discovery also follows a bell-shaped curve, and it leads production because you can't produce until you discover. So actually, if you look at discoveries, they also follow a bell-shaped curve. And you can only produce as much as you discover. So as you get to the other side of the discovery curve, what's happening is your production is going to decline. You can only produce as much as is within the discovery envelope. And what has happened in the United States is that we reached the peak of discovery, and now we've reached the peak of production, and there is a continuing disparity between the amount of oil the little bits of oil that we are finding and the amount that we are producing. The difference between the black curve and all the bars that I'm showing you looks something like this. Okay, so this is the increasing deficit of oil that we are seeing in the United States. We are basically pulling more and more oil out of the ground than we are discovering. We're discovering practically nothing at this point. And so the deficit continues to increase. Okay, now not everybody agrees with this view. The noted petroleum geologist and scientist Newt Gingrich was on CNN recently, on Larry King, I believe it was, and was pushing a program called Drill Here, Drill Now, Pay Less. I'm not sure where the drill here part was. He was in the CNN studios. I don't know whether that was in Atlanta or in New York City, neither of which would be particularly profitable to drill. But anyway, he wants to drill here, drill now, and pay less. But first, before you do anything, you have to go and buy the T-shirt. Okay, so that's his point of view, and unfortunately, many people have this point of view. One of the things that turns my stomach on television, many things turn my stomach. One of them are these investment bankers from Wall Street, most of whom no longer have jobs, wonderfully. But anyhow, the ones on Wall Street who get up on CNN and say, well, there's lots of oil. The companies, we just have to give financial incentives to the oil companies to go out there and find the oil, like they've been sitting on their hands for the last 40 years and haven't been looking for any of it. So not everybody agrees with the view I gave. But even if experts like Newt Gingrich are right, and there is more oil out there, there are a few realities that we need to think about. First of all, finding that oil isn't going to be easy or cheap, because most of the United States has been, well, all of the continental United States and most of Alaska has been thoroughly explored. So if there's any oil out there, it's going to be offshore, and it's going to be deep, and it's not going to be easy to find, and it's going to cost a lot of money to drill and get that oil, even if it's there. Second, there's another thing that needs to be taken into account. It's not likely we're going to find any big fields. This is a graph of what are called giants, or very large oil fields, and how much oil was found in these fields, or how much was found as a function of time. We are not finding any of these big fields, and this is more or less also a Hubbard curve, okay? It's been over, what is that number? It's been over 25 years since we found a field with more than 10 billion barrels of oil in it. It's been over, what am I looking at, 10 years that we found a field with over 5 billion barrels of oil in it. So there may be others lurking out there. Maybe off the coast of Brazil somewhere, there's a 10 billion barrel oil field. But that really isn't going to solve our problem long term, even if we found that field. Those fields, though, are pretty much gone. People in the oil industry are pretty smart, and they've looked in most of the places they're likely to find oil. And finally, and this gets to the drill here, drill now, pay less, even if we found a big field, simply the technological problems of bringing it online are going to delay that oil for at least 10 to 20 years. The North Slope of Alaska was discovered in 1968, and it took, what, 20 years to start bringing the oil in. It takes a long time. This bump, I believe, is actually for other resources in Alaska that people think that they can develop. And even if we found it today, it takes a while to bring these things online. So this is not the solution for the next year, for the next 5 years or so. Okay, let's just take a quick look at the numbers and assume that I'm right and Newt Gingrich is wrong. And that is total U.S. oil reserves at the moment are about 20.9 billion barrels. And I would say that's all there is. There ain't no more. Okay? How much oil do we use? Okay, total U.S. daily consumption. I have 2005 figures. They're all about the same. 21.7 million barrels a day, of which we import 11.7 billion barrels a day. I was around in 1971 when we were going to become energy independent by 1990, but I don't know whatever happened to that. Okay, so my question to you is, you know, get out your calculators, get out your computers, or get out the napkins, the paper ones, not the cloth ones.
That's how real
Okay, this is how this is something our students can't do, unfortunately. I want you to do a back of the envelope calculation of how much, or back of the napkin calculation of how much oil we have left. Okay? And for those of you who are young and challenged by this kind of thing, I'll walk you through it. 20.7 million barrels a day, 11.7 million barrels a day imported. I think you can do the math, and you come up with, where did this go? There we go. Okay, 9 million barrels a day we use in the United States. Okay, that's consistent with Kjell's estimate, 2 times 5 times 2 million barrel a day tankers a day. So 10 million barrels a day. I don't need the details. I'm doing this to 1 decimal place. No decimal places even. Okay? Now, so how much do we use in a year? All right? Well, that's 9 times 365, 9 times 5. No. 9 is close to 10. 365 is close to 300. One number's a little higher, one number's a little lower. So 10 million barrels a day times 300 days in a year. I'll give you 2 weeks off for vacation. That gives you roughly 3 billion barrels a year. Okay? So how much time do we have left? 20.9 billion barrels total, 3 billion barrels a day, 29.9 rounded off to 21. 21 divided by 3 is 7. Okay? 7, this is 2008. So 2015, give or minus 2 years. It doesn't really matter. That's crunch time, all right? That's about how much oil we have left. Domestic oil. Domestic production, okay? Well, what's going to happen? I mean, I do this calculation. People say, well, are we going to run out? Yeah, this isn't like one day we're going to be producing, and the next day it's all gone. Okay? We're not going to drop off a cliff. What will happen is what we have seen in the last 2 or 3 years, namely a constant rise in the price of oil, especially in the price of domestic oil. Okay, and that will go along. As domestic oil gets scarcer and becomes more expensive, the price will go up. And eventually we'll get to the point where, for example, we're paying $152 to fill our 17-gallon gas tank in our SUVs instead of the current $68 that we're paying. And at that point, people's behavior might begin to change. Unfortunately, I think this is the only way that people's behavior is going to change. As the price goes up, people's behavior will change, and in the economics of other technologies will also become more economic. So people's behavior will change as the price goes up, so we're not going to go off a cliff, but as it gets more expensive, that's when things will begin to change. Of course, one option would be to move to Saudi Arabia or even Venezuela, the workers' paradise. Until that happens, what we can do, the only choice is to continue to increase our imports of oil. Well, there's lots of oil out there. We're the world's superpower. We'll just go out and, buy up all that oil and use it. Well, there's a couple of problems. Okay? First of all, we're not alone. Second of all, the Hubbard curve, the peak oil applies anywhere you go. And so many countries that used to produce oil, well, they still produce some oil, but they've already reached their peak oil also. And when you add up all of their bell-shaped curves, you get a global bell-shaped curve, and most of you are familiar with this, that looks something like this. And here is one version of global hydrocarbon production under one scenario. And as, again, most people in this audience know, we are somewhere near the peak of that curve. And this particular estimate, the peak comes out at, what did I say? Come out at 2010. And total production at that point is around 32 million billion barrels a day. Billion barrels a year. I've got it in years there. Okay, so let's look at that number very quickly. Again, a back-of-the-envelope calculation. What is total daily production if it's 32 billion barrels a year? Well, let's be generous. Let's round it up to 35 billion barrels per year. Again, I don't care about the decimal points here. All right? So that's per year, 365 days a year. We'll divide one by the other. Again, let's use 350 days per year. And what we come out with is more or less 100 million barrels per day as maximum global oil production. Now, it might be 85, it might be 93, it might be 100, it might be 110. I don't really care. It's on the order of 100 million barrels a day. That's all there is. That's all there is. After that, it's going to decline. And it all comes out at about somewhere in that 2010, 2015 time range. So again, it's crunch time. Okay, now, in all fairness, I have to say there are other estimates as to when that will happen. And the two on the right, I mean, some say, okay, it might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit higher. There's two estimates that are much higher than that, or at least two estimates that are much higher than that. The blue one and the green one that I'm showing come from the United States Geological Survey, but we know who signs the checks for those people. So I think those numbers have to be considered as relatively dubious. Okay, and there's one more problem. And that is the following, and that has to do with global production. We walk around in the United States, we beat ourselves over the head about how much oil we use and everything else, and we use more per capita than anybody else. But if you look at the curves of the growth of oil production, we're actually not doing so badly. We're the blue line, okay? It's going up, but it's not terrible. But look at the green line. That's the so-called developing countries, little places with populations like China, India, Brazil, and Indonesia, okay? Look at the rate of increase from those countries. This is China's oil consumption, all right? It's on the order of about 2 million barrels per day in 1986. 10 years later, it's close to 4 million barrels a day. And in 10 years after that, it's over 7 million barrels a day. It doubles every 10 years. This is exponential growth. And this is something that I think we really have to understand. This is not a U.S. problem. This is a global problem. We're not going to, as previous speakers have said, we're not going to be able to just go in, march in there, and grab the oil and come out because other people want the oil. Okay? This was a picture I took when I was in far western China in the Taklamakan Desert on the Silk Road. We went in for lunch in a restaurant and came out, and there were a dozen SUVs parked out there. Okay? Except for certain groups of people in the Middle East, most people would love to have our lifestyle. They want to drive an SUV, they want to live in a single-family house, they want to wear Levi jeans and Armani suits, and they want to eat McDonald's or something equivalent to it. Most people aspire to a much higher standard of living than they currently have. And this is part of the equation. Okay, just to give you an example, this is change in oil consumption since 1965. We've only gone up 79%. China has gone up 3,000%. And behind China, you have India, Brazil, Indonesia, and everybody else, or most of the other so-called developing world. Okay, and this is the problem, because remember I did that calculation and I said maximum output's going to be about 100 million barrels a year. Okay? If you look at this projection of demand, and you ask where do we come out with 100 million barrels, we hit 100 million barrels just about 2016. So just at the time that we reach peak oil production, demand will equal peak production. And at that point, demand will exceed the maximum production we could ever possibly have. And the take-home lesson is that in about 7 years, we will exceed maximum total oil production. And at that point, I don't know what's going to happen. Okay? It seems to me that this is an equation for perhaps incredible political, social, economic, and whatever upheaval. Because if you've got a commodity that everybody wants and there is not enough of it to go around, you've got problems. And so this is not just a U.S. problem, it's a global problem. And let me just do one more thing. This is per capita oil consumption in 2003. And again, in the United States, particularly on a college campus, people go around, beat their breasts about, not beat their breasts, beat themselves over the head about how much oil we use, and why can't we be like the Europeans? You know, they use half the oil that we do. Okay, so let's say this is the disparity with the rest of the world, but also why can't we just be like the Europeans? So let me ask you, are you ready to make the ultimate sacrifice? Okay? The ultimate sacrifice, as I've defined it at this point, is cut your oil consumption by half. Live like a European, okay? Eat wine and cheese, and I just spent 6 months in Paris. It was great to live like a European. Didn't have a car either. All right, were you really willing to live like a European? So what I say to my students is, if you're willing to live like a European, which 2 of your family's 4 cars are you going to get rid of? Which 3 of the 6 televisions? Which half of your wardrobe? Are you willing to give up most of the meat and processed foods that you eat, and eat only local fresh fruits and vegetables with occasional amounts of fish? Are you willing to make all of those sacrifices? And after a little hesitation, usually they say yes, and say, okay, now what are the consequences of that? So let's say we reduce our oil consumption by 50%, and we take all the oil that we're saving, and this assumes constant production. I'm not talking about depletion, just constant output, okay, for the next 5 years. And we take all that oil and we ship it to developing to the rest of the world. How much are we going to increase the standard of living? Well, the problem is there's 10 times as many of them as there is of us. So if we reduce our oil consumption by, another back-of-the-envelope calculation, 1.5 gallons per day per person, and we distribute it to 10 times as many people, we're going to raise their consumption, or make more available to them, 0.15 gallons. So their standard of living goes to here. At that point, we're still using 3 times as much oil as most of the rest of the world. Do we declare game over? This is fairness, this is justice. Now, go back to China, go back to India, go back to Brazil, and be happy? Of course not. I mean, we might want to do that, but they're not going to be too happy doing that. And so here's another scenario. Let's say, okay, let's go for energy equality throughout the world. Everybody gets the same amount of energy. Total world is about 0.5, 0.6 gallons a day. Everybody gets that amount delivered to their home, and then they can do whatever they want with it. Well, what would that require in order to do that? That would require that we reduce our consumption by 80%. So that means you'd have to get rid of 4.5 of the 6 televisions that you own, and 3 of the 4 cars, and as I said, 80% of your wardrobe, and you'd really be reduced to eating, I don't know what, fruits and vegetables grown locally and transported by bicycle into your town. So, and the Europeans, who have done such a wonderful job with less oil than we do, have this fantastic transportation network, and everything you can get by bus to anywhere, or train or bus to get anywhere in France, for example. They'd have to reduce their consumption by 60%. And at that point, everybody would be happy, I suppose. Okay? So on that rather sobering tone, I wish you a nice day. Oh, right, exactly.
I may need you here. Yeah, I'd like to make an announcement that every table has index cards. At the end of the talks, we're going to collect any cards where you have questions, bring them up to the table here. I am completely expecting questions from the Picnocenti about the value of using reserves to production ratios as a predictive tool. Okay, yes, that's it. Can we, it was running on its own.
You might have a timer on it.
Okay. Wait a second. Dwight, sorry. It's not on the screen yet. Is that F5? Oops.
Okay.
So to do it on the screen is just...
No, it's already on the screen. They control that.
Oh, they control it. Okay.
Okay. So then you just hit this.
Okay. Very good. Okay. I work at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, which is part of Columbia University, and after showing you the various methods of seismic exploration, I am the administrator for a group of marine geologists and geophysicists. So they actually make their living using research vessels, towing streamers with hydrophones attached and shooting off seismic sound sources and picking up the reflections from the ocean floor. These streamers are 4 to 6 miles long. You trail 4 to 6 of them behind your boat. These are all for basic science budgets. We don't do oil exploration, although we have just converted a used oil exploration vessel, the Western Geico, to become the Marcus Langseth, part of the UNOLS fleet, part of the National Science Foundation fleet. And I just wanted to share with you the impact that rising factor costs have had on our basic research. within the 3 years of retrofitting the ship, the factor cost raised so much that we ended up with, probably a 30 or 40% cost overrun. Delayed the science expeditions for quite a while. You could not keep technical staff. They kept getting hired away by the oil industry to go work on their boats. And at the moment, the costs of running the ship per day, which come out of a separate operations budget, blind to us, we use a science budget. The ship costs are so high that they're having to raid the science budgets, and we are going to have to lease that ship for probably 5 months a year to industry just to have enough money to do our science. We see with our polar expeditions, where you have a big logistics nightmare and getting oil down there, that price of a gallon of oil can be a gallon, not a barrel, $100 delivered to Antarctica to do your research. So these price ramifications are rippling throughout not only industry, science, research. It's really affecting the way we do business. I want to just quickly run through a couple of the slides that Gilbert sent to us. This is the north slope of Alaska. Oh, I don't know if I can control this thing. It must be on an automatic timer. Okay. You can see Prudhoe Bay up at the top, and the purple line going down is the transatlantic pipeline. It's got a minimum capacity of about 200,000 barrels a day that you need to keep in it to keep it flowing, or they need to be pumping. National Petroleum Reserve on the left, off limits at the moment. ANWR, the Antarctic, I'm thinking of Antarctica. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge on the right. The 1002 area is the most prospective for oil in that area. Okay. Boy, can't control this. This was the discovery well for Prudhoe Bay. It's out on the coastal plain. And I just wanted to show you that even back in the 60s, we were in extreme conditions. This is a desolate spot. You work in the Arctic winter when you can actually get vehicles in. You transport all of your equipment in by Caterpillars. At this point, they were flying around in single-engine aircraft and in helicopters with balsa wood blades. So it's a real cowboy operation, kind of. This was the drill stem test from the discovery well. Again, it's a dirty business, but this was the highly productive Lisburn limestone and an off-structured, excuse me, I have this thing with technology. Okay. He seems to have it on automatic.
Can you change it for just a second to the...
To manual override?
No, I have to the sponsor there. Thank you.
So this was 1967. It took almost 10 years to actually bring the production online. And from the mid-70s onwards, Prudhoe Bay, North Slope of Alaska, contributed about a quarter of the U.S. total production. It's now in decline. It's now down to about 17% of our total production, total U.S. plus Alaska being the top line. This is showing just the general geologic structure that they have there. The jiggly line is an unconformity, where an erosional surface where a tight formation comes up against a lot of other formations and traps oil in all of those red fields. That's the structure you look for. This is a close-up of in the ANWR area of the 1002 area. The deformed area is all overthrust belt and not very prospective. It's really only in that northern coastal plain that most of the oil is expected to be found. Why do we think ANWR is a place that is highly prospective for having oil? There are seeps that come visible at the ground. There's abundant source rock. There's an organic rich shale. This dips underground, becomes the source rock for a lot of the North Slope Prudhoe oil. We have oil-saturated sandstone and limestone reservoirs here. We have that unconformity that we look for that traps the oil. We have structure. That's a breached anticline. You can just see the eroded valley with the sloping flanks on both sides. In the subsurface, that could form a cap. But if you put all of these off-limits areas together and look at the P50, the probability 50 numbers for what we might find there, meaning you're just as likely to, the oil's just as likely to be there as not, as Colin Campbell would say, you come up with numbers that are on the order of 10 billion barrels for ANWR, about the same for the NPRA, a little bit more offshore where there's now an Arctic land grab going on. As a matter of fact, a couple of the scientists in my group are now out in the North Sea on the U.S. Coast Guard Healy, mapping the ocean shore bottom along with some of the Canadians to establish offshore rights, as are the Norwegians, the Russians, and everybody else. But if you look offshore, there's, again, the P50, that doesn't mean you're going to find it. There's possibly on the order of 20 billion barrels. These are based off of USGS estimates, but not the dreaded 2000 assessment. These are actually probably a bit more realistic. If you pile the production on top of each other, you can see the massive amount that Prudhoe Bay has contributed. There's black lines where we are right now. Everything beyond that is forecast. You can see that all of these other fields coming on are just incremental additions to supply that slow the decline, and if enough of them come on at once, you might maintain a plateau for a while, but even piling one on top of another, you're facing a pretty precipitous decline by 2020. The conclusion from Kjell is that the most likely new discoveries in both the National Petroleum Reserve and in ANWR, if indeed they are ever open to exploration, will be relatively small fields on the order of 100 million to at most a billion barrel fields in size. And so it would take a significant number of those if you were to reverse the decline and even be able to hold it steady. Thank you very much. Okay. I may need my audio guy or my video guy again. Let's see. Yeah, thanks. Escape isn't working. And this Gilbert.
That one?
No, Gilbert down here. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yes. All right. We do welcome Jeremy Gilbert. Do you have a testimony?
Well, thank you, Sally, and thank you, ASPO-USA, for inviting me back once more. It's great to be here with all of you. When Steve asked me to speak, it was a long time ago, and I actually forgot what he'd asked me to speak about until about 2 weeks ago. Apparently, he wanted me to go back to basics. I'm not sure where he is, but I think he wanted me to go back to basics and remind people of why we're here. What is all this peak oil stuff about? There are only a limited number of facts that we actually have our hands on, and I think you're going to, over these 2 days, you're going to hear a lot of the same stories, see a lot of the same numbers coming up over and over again. So it's pleasing to be speaking at the first part of the meeting, because otherwise I think I'd be living on other people's fag ends. But I want to go back and remind you of what this peak oil message is all about. And my message, not perhaps to the people in this room, because I know you are all aware and are thinking, but my message to the people of America, from us in Europe, who, as Ken has pointed out, are way ahead of you in this respect, our message is that it's time for you guys to wake up. Well, thank you. You've had a series of wake-up calls. Your first wake-up call, arguably, was back in 2001. Kjell has reminded us of the first ASPO meeting in Uppsala. Was it 2002, Kjell? Okay, well, you see, I wasn't really awake when I wrote this down, but 2002. And it's amazing how many people claim to have been present in Uppsala in 2002. I was there. I know Kjell was there. There weren't many of us. 55. I'm sure there are several hundred people who claim to have been there. We had a wake-up call. We've had wake-up calls over that intervening 6 years, we've had from the ASPO-USA group, we've had Denver in 2005, we've had Boston, we've had Houston. We've had a series of wake-up calls, but are people waking up? Has much changed since that first call back in Uppsala 6 years ago? If we think back, and I'm sorry for getting the date wrong, but it doesn't really make an awful lot of difference. 2001, 2002, what did we see while America has been sleeping? 2002, if we looked at discovery rates, the graph that Colin Campbell showed at that meeting, and which everybody shows in every talk at every ASPO meeting, we've already had it at least once today, we know that discovery rates peaked back in the 1960s, 1970s. Certainly in 2001, 2002, we were well aware that discovery rates had peaked and were declining. At that time, we had access to calculations which showed pretty clearly that it wasn't going to be very long before the reserves which we had were going to be incapable of supplying enough oil to meet projections of demand. So 2001, 2002, we knew there was a problem coming. The numbers were a bit fuzzy perhaps, but they were there. Colin Campbell, again, always says when he produces numbers, produces a report, that the only numbers in the report in which you can have any confidence are the page numbers. That was true in 2000, certainly true in 2001. And I think even at that time, there was some recognition that it wasn't just geology, it wasn't just reservoir engineering which were giving us the supply problem. There was also an emerging political problem. There was an investment problem. The political problem was that not every producing country necessarily shared the in the greed, or supported the greed, I guess, of the consuming countries. Some of the Middle East producing countries, even at that time, were starting to ask questions about whether or not it was to their advantage to increase production rates. We saw that the major oil companies and the oil-producing countries were slowing down their investments in exploration and in new development. So even back in 6, 7 years ago, I think some of these non-technical reasons for concern about oil supply were there. But let's flick forward then from 2001, 2002 to now. What's different? Well, certainly the discovery rate problem hasn't changed. There haven't been any really significant discoveries over the last 5, 6, 7 years. We're still producing, we're still finding far less oil than we use each year by a factor of about 4. As far as our calculations of supply in the future and how those match up with demand, I think we have much better calculations now. We still don't have access to the numbers which industry has, but people outside industry itself have come up with additional data. They've come up with better ways of handling that data. I think we've got a much clearer idea of when this oil supply problem is going to hit us. And if anything, our projections of when it's going to hit us have moved forward, moved closer to where we are right now. And on the third point here, the recognition of other type, political and investment risk, I think things have clearly got worse. The Middle Eastern countries who hold perhaps 70% or more of remaining oil reserves are, if anything, becoming more conscious of the fact that producing those reserves early and monetizing those reserves early is not to their advantage. Why would anyone in Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates want to produce more of their oil more quickly, put their money into a Merrill Lynch or put their money into a collapsing bank. I mean, it's clearly not a very attractive prospect. We've also seen over the last 5 or 6 years that the IOCs, the big international oil companies, are increasingly, rather than investing their money in new resources, investing their money in exploration, they're returning their profits to their shareholders. They've been buying back their shares, they've been increasing dividend levels. The IOCs are not investing in the way which we would have hoped they would and expected they would if we go back a decade. So while you've slept in America, really not an awful lot has changed. Certainly things haven't got any better. If we look at oil consumption per capita around the world, we still see that North America is by far the biggest consumer. Okay, there are other countries, particularly around the Middle East, which use quite a lot of oil per head, but then those countries in the Middle East which use a lot of oil, it is their oil, so I guess they have some right to use it. But we've seen very little change in this consumption per capita on a worldwide basis. And it's worth bearing in mind, I guess, what most of us know, but the people who have the oil, there aren't very many of them. If we redraw the map of the world so as to show countries with an area corresponding to the oil that they've got, we get a pretty skewed up looking world. The countries that use most of the world's oil are not the countries which have it in the first place. And this imbalance, as Ken pointed out a few minutes ago, is going to cause tremendous social and other problems over the next decade or so. It's interesting to me as well, I have family who live in the Middle East and we visit there fairly regularly. Saudi Arabia has actually cut, in the last, just over a year ago, cut the price of the gasoline that it sells to its inhabitants. So as the rest of the world is sort of fighting with increasing prices, Saudi Arabia reduced the cost of gasoline by 25%. We've had, earlier this year, at long last, some might say, a wake-up call, or yet another wake-up call, you guys really do sleep, another wake-up call from the International Energy Association. Now, the IEA is an organization which for many, many years refused really to recognize that we had a supply problem. They were very good at forecasting demand, and once they'd forecast what demand was going to be, basically they said that supply would match demand. That was their role in advising world governments on what the supply-demand picture looked like. But they've woken up, and Mr. Birol, who's their chief economist, told us in April of this year that the IEA saw 3 problems: geology, the lack of oil in the ground; investment, the reluctance of those who have access to the oil to speed up the development of that oil; and third, the policy of main producers. And those 3 together, he said, make the future of oil very difficult. I think what he meant was the future of oil supply very difficult. So we're starting to see from agencies outside ASPO, outside the peak oil movement, a recognition that there really is a problem. Now, the response of too many people, and those too many people include many of our political leaders, the response of too many of our people is that there isn't really a problem, that somebody's making all this up. The explorers will fix it. We read in the paper about big potential discoveries in the Gulf of Mexico, this Jack complex, was it last year? Tupi in Brazil, very end of last year, beginning of this year. And then we have discussion about what would happen in the US if you opened up the OCS, if you went into ANWR. It's all okay, it's just a matter of people getting out there and doing some decent exploration. And then we have the people who say that, well, there isn't really a problem, because if you look at the reserves numbers, which are published by the oil companies, by their agencies. It looks like reserves to production ratio was about 40 to 1. We've got lots of time to find other energy sources, biofuels, solar, wind, tide, UFOs. Something will come up in that period of time with something which will balance everything out. So just take it easy, don't worry. And it's this sort of technology thing. Technology will fix it. Technology always comes along and in the end changes things, makes things better. If we could produce our fields so as to add about 10% to recovery efficiency, we'd have billions of barrels to play with. Well, let's look at a few of these dreams. Oh, and just while we're here, the Herald Tribune last Monday carried an article by Henry Kissinger, who I guess ranks up there as an oil expert with Newt Gingrich. He says, or he's suggesting that rather than waiting passively for the next blow to fall, America should play a major role establishing a coordinating group to end the blackmail of the strong by the weak. This is the blackmail of the US and its consuming colleagues by these little countries in the Middle East. Coordinated action could bring down the price of oil by eliminating the speculative pressures behind recent price rises. While we still have people like Newt Gingrich and Kissinger telling us that there isn't a problem, that all we need to do is use our military might, our political might to sort things out, we're not just in a dream, we're in a nightmare. This is the graph which everybody shows, so you'll see it about every 20 minutes during these 2 days, but at least mine's in color. I think Ken's was in black and white. You can't look at this graph often enough, quite honestly. This is the problem. Discoveries peaked 40 years ago. Production now, as over the last few decades, with one very short period as an exception, production increases all the time. But what we're producing is the oil that we discovered 40, 50 years ago. Once this cushion of exploration success back in the 40s, 50s, 60s is used up, we cannot but have a peak in oil supply. The oil supply cannot keep on increasing while exploration fails to refill the tank. So it's how people like Mr. Kissinger, who many people had a lot of admiration for many years ago, how he can argue that or believe that all we need to do is sort out these little countries in the Middle East which are blackmailing you, it's beyond belief. Anyway, this is the background. This is the situation we're in. Discoveries are only contributing about 1 barrel for every 4 or 5 that we use. Now, in the last month or so, one of your federal agencies came up with a description of what might happen, or an estimate of what might happen in terms of discoveries if all of the OCS was opened up to exploration. And the numbers that they came up with were quite significant. It looked as though something like a 20%, I think, increase in reserves could be achieved by opening up all of the OCS. But these sort of figures, these sort of presentations totally ignore the time taken to recover any of this oil. You're looking 15, 20, 25 years ahead probably if you want to see a substantial amount of this OCS oil coming into the production system. This is not a solution in the short term. If we really are looking at a peak which is going to come in the next 7, 8 years, and I mean, I think it's going to come a lot sooner than that, but if we are going to see a peak, say around about 2015, which I think is what Ken suggested, this stuff is not going to help you. This isn't going to delay the peak. It may change the shape of the curve beyond the peak a little bit, but the peak itself is going to come just as soon as it ever was. This R/P, this reserves to production ratio thing, it doesn't seem to matter how many times people try and clarify for the general public what this R/P thing is all about. Still, we find the oil companies telling us reserve to production ratio has been around 40 for quite a while, just don't worry. And Ken explained why this R over P ratio. So certainly new technology is helping us find more fields. The problem is the fields tend to be much smaller. The rock conditions in those reservoirs tends to be a lot more complex. And the new technology, rather than giving us higher recovery efficiencies, as we might expect if we were redeveloping the Prudhoe bays and these other big fields of a few decades ago, this new technology we actually need in many cases to be able to match in these new complex fields the recovery efficiency we saw in the older ones. So if we look, and again I've used these graphs before, so anyone who's heard me speak over the last few years will recognize them probably. If we look at two fields I've chosen here, Forties, which is one of the biggest fields in the North Sea, Prudhoe Bay, biggest field in North America. If we plot the performance of those fields in terms of rate versus cum production, we see that the trends, the performance trends which define the efficiency of production from these fields doesn't really change over decades. So despite the fact that we're throwing new technology at these fields, what we're doing is overcoming unanticipated problems. We start producing the fields, we believe we're going to achieve a 40% recovery efficiency. As we get more data, we find the fields are more complicated than we thought. We need new technology even to achieve the 40%. So don't, without understanding a little bit more than most of us do, don't accept that new technology is going to give us higher recovery efficiency from the fields that we're discovering now than the fields that we discovered a few decades ago. I don't think it's going to happen. There's no doubt we're trying harder. If you look at world rig usage or US rig usage, plotted here on the left-hand side, don't worry about the numbers, just look at the shape of the lines. You can see that around the world generally, we're drilling a lot more wells. We're using a lot more rigs, perhaps getting on for, well, close to doubling over the last 7 or 8 years, up from, say, about under 2,000 to getting up to 3,500 rigs. But it's done nothing, basically, for world oil production. World oil production's gone up maybe 10% at the time that we've increased rig usage by 50 or 60%. We're chasing smaller and smaller returns. We're certainly trying hard, but are we actually achieving very much? And then, for all the people who tell us that we're not approaching a peak, that we're going to get to 115, 120 million barrels a day, well, I would say just look at a few plots of production versus time. This one's from the most recent BP statistical review. That looks to me, if I was out walking in the hills and I went up a land profile which looked like this, I think I'd feel as though I was getting pretty close to the top of the hill when I got out there to the right-hand side. If we take the approach to predicting future performance, future supply, which people from the oil drum, Chris Skrabowski, various others have used, we build up a picture of what future projects, known projects, are going to add to production. We get a plot that looks like this. Well, does it look like a peak? Well, if it doesn't look like a peak to you, maybe you haven't seen very many peaks. It certainly looks like one to me. Some things are changing. Others aren't. Other things are changing here as well. We've got an increase in world production from the OPEC countries over the last 5-6 years. We've got an increase in production, looking at the left-hand graph now, from the former Soviet Union. We've got things look as though they were going quite nicely over that 5-year period. But then if you look at 2007, something perhaps seems to be going in the opposite direction. We've got this average annual change over a 5-year period, but just at the very end of the period is something getting a little bit different. Well, the one really interesting thing, I think, at the end of that 5-year period is Russia. If we look at Russian oil production, the second biggest, or almost, well, second biggest world oil producer, we see this year-on-year growth through the early part of the 2000s, and this was the growth that people were counting on to keep non-OPEC production growing. But over the last few years, it looks as though Russian oil production has come perhaps very close to reaching a peak. The rate of growth year on year in 2006, 2007, down to little more than 1%, just about, well, about 2%. But if you look at even the more recent figures and look at them on a sort of monthly, or I think these are perhaps quarterly basis, no, they're monthly figures, it looks as though at the end of 2007, Russian production may well have peaked. Now, it may have peaked for geological reasons, or it may have peaked for political reasons, or it may have peaked for economic reasons. But one way or another, it looks as though it's peaked. It doesn't really matter why it's peaked. It looks as though Russian production is not going to keep on growing in the way in which the world, and Europe in particular, had hoped. There are solutions, of course, to all of the supply and demand problems. They may not be very palatable solutions, but if we give things time, maybe some of these solutions can work. If we look at how energy growth is changing, energy usage growth is changing relative to GDP growth, we find in the developed world, in the OECD countries, that we're using energy more and more efficiently. We're achieving growth, and over that last 5-6 years, we've achieved quite a lot of growth, and we're using less energy to do it. Now, if we could achieve the same sort of effect in the non-OECD countries, where they use a lot more energy for every unit of GDP, then maybe we get somewhere. We can see that the non-OECD figures are also coming down. They're achieving growth and they're using less energy to do it. China, India are becoming more efficient in the way in which they use energy. The problem is they're a long way behind us. If we had lots of time, maybe this could all be sorted out, but we haven't got a lot of time. In the US, it looks as though if we look at gasoline consumption changes over the last 18 months or so, well, this was plotted up to June this year, we can see that the fact that gasoline was costing a lot more did achieve some pretty significant change in the way in which people were buying the gasoline. Ken talked about the way that the US would have to change its lifestyle to match Europe. Well, here was a beginning in the way in which you used your energy, which didn't seem to change your lifestyle very much. I stayed with my stepson in San Jose over the last few nights, and I didn't see much change in his way of using gasoline. He talks about it a lot, but I didn't see much change. But it looks as though some people are actually starting to change their usage without changing their lifestyle particularly. I mean, have your life... You've got 500 people here in the room. I would doubt that most of you feel that your lifestyle has gone downhill an awful lot in the last 18 months, but somehow you probably are using a little bit less gasoline. So if we had time, we could make all these changes. The problem is we just haven't got the time. If gasoline becomes short, if oil becomes short, we can imagine how things might change in our own countries. We've had a little bit of experience in Europe with this. We've had the Chinese people have had some experience with it. These are shots of what happened when gas was in short supply or diesel was in short supply just for a few days in China and in the UK earlier this year. Within hours of these shortages developing, we had service stations choked with cars, roads choked with cars, queuing for gasoline, queuing for diesel. These set of effects, which we see when we have short-term problems, give us just a small taste of what things might be like if we had bigger ones. So, in conclusion, I guess I can say that we've got things under control. We're sitting around talking about all of this. Everything is in good shape. Wake up, America.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Ken. Before we open to the card, if you have cards here, there are blue-shirted assistants here in the audience that are going to bring them up. I want to ask a general question to each of our speakers first, which may be a theme that we carry through the conference, particular to their sessions. If you could make one suggestion to the incoming administration of the U.S., no matter which party, regarding energy policy, what would that be? I'll give you, Jeremy.
Well, I did actually get warning of this question last night, and I was told to think about it, and I'm afraid I didn't very much. But I think, I think the biggest problem that the world, and I guess in particular America, because it's the biggest user of petroleum, the biggest problem is the ignorance of most people about this world oil supply-demand situation. So my suggestion would be that people who attended a 10-hour course on world oil supply and demand would get a 10% cut in their income tax. Sally?
Yes.
Somebody passed up a question. Am I allowed to answer it?
So, what would I say to President Palin?
I'd be too far away from her running to...
We are a nonpartisan group.
It's rumored she sleeps with a guy who works on the North Slope, so she must know everything about this already. I guess the message I would try to give to somebody would be that this whole situation is real, it's huge, it's global, and it's transformational, and that people will survive. Not all of them. Some of them will die in wars, some of them will die in famine, some of them will die from inadequate health, new diseases and everything else that we can't cope with. But people will survive. Civilization as a whole will survive. I'm not sure all the governments that are around now will survive. I'm not sure whether this one will survive. But this is going to change us in a way, it'll change the world in a way that we have probably not seen since the Industrial Revolution. And so there are enormous changes coming. I don't think anybody currently really has a handle on how to cope with all of this. And so the recommendation I would have would be that we really need to put as many resources as possible on an international scale to deal with it. And in the United States, that means not throwing away our money on a space program to go to Mars, on farm subsidies for crops that are already highly in demand, on bridges to nowhere, on all the earmarks that Congress hands out, on lots and lots of other things. We'd have to just strip the budget down and say whatever we can spare to throw at this problem and understand it is really what needs to be done. And I don't think we even come close. Little projects, developing a more efficient windmill, not to disparage windmills or anything like that, but that's not it. We need to bring in natural scientists and earth scientists and social scientists and really deal with this problem, bring in economists and deal with this entire problem, and it's got to be done on a global level. I don't know whether we can do such a thing, but that's what I would say.
Thank you. We've got a lot of good questions here. I'm going to be able to give only about 6 or 7. Okay. Fortunately, you'd have a face print now, and you'll be able to catch these guys out in the lobby for the rest of the conference. For Jeremy, how do you explain Nansen Solari's optimism about being able to recover so much more oil from the world's oil reservoirs?
I can't. I mean, Solari is a very experienced reservoir engineer. I guess he comes from the same sort of, maybe a little bit younger than me, but he's lived through the same sort of experiences. It doesn't make any sense to me. As I said when I gave my talk, I'm not denying for a second that technology isn't making our industry more efficient. It certainly is. The problem is that the situations with which we're having to deal are getting more and more difficult. So we need that new technology just to stay in the same place. There's no doubt that over the last 20, 30 years, or there's little doubt that over the last 20, 30 years, we have been achieving higher recovery efficiency from our oil fields. Most of you know that the typical oil field only yields about 35 to 40% of the oil that's in place. We can't produce the rest. Decades ago, it might have been only 30%. So we are getting better at producing these fields. But there are physical limits as to how much we can improve things. And I think that Solari misses the point. I think that if we were redeveloping the fields which he worked on, we could do a lot better. But I think because the fields that we are developing are far more complex than the ones we developed before, we're just not going to see those recovery efficiencies.
We have some Petroleum 101 types of questions. What about tar sands, oil shale, coal to liquids? I know this is a whole nother session, but quickly, Ken, why are so little added by these?
I think one of the biggest problems is there may be a significant amount in the ground. The problems of extracting these, not only the technological problems, but the environmental problems, I think have not been solved. It's possible they'll be solved, but at some point you come up against basic laws of physics and chemistry, and if you take oil shale and you have to heat it and expand it in order to get the oil out, then you wind up with 3 or 4 or 5 times the volume of material that you produced before, and and it's sort of toxic anyway, and you got to find out where to put it. I think these are really significant hurdles to all of this, and basically we haven't solved these problems in any satisfactory way.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I've got 2 questions here. One is, what is the likelihood that lack of refinery capacity for heavy and sour crudes will further decrease effective, usable production capacity? Well, I'm not an expert on refineries, but I do know that there is a big, I suppose you might call it a backlog of discovered fields awaiting development, and a large number of these are heavy and sour. Because it's so expensive and environmentally unacceptable to build refineries in most of the Western world, we have lagged behind in building refineries which can deal with these unpleasant crudes. So until we see some of the refineries which are at present under construction in the Middle and Far East, until we see those come on stream, I think we will have a problem. I think the fact that a lot of the new oil coming on stream is heavy and sour will make life more difficult.
Okay, I'll give one to Ken. It's almost time to break here.
Okay.
We'll do one more from
Okay,
each of
well,
our
this one
speakers
is
here.
about manufacturing is energy intensive, and what will happen to both the location and composition and total size of the manufacturing industry. There's going to be some significant displacements. When I put that number up and said Americans use 3 gallons of oil a day, that per capita, that does not mean that the average family burns 4, if there is such a thing anymore, of an average family, that the average family of 4 burns 12 gallons of gasoline per day in their automobiles. A lot of that is in manufacturing, is in food preparation, and so forth. And so the cuts are if we're talking about cutbacks, a lot of that will come in terms of manufacturing or food production, with then the attendant impacts. So it's not just the burning of oil, it's not just driving cars and burning oil that way. There are a lot of other ways that each of us consumes our 3 gallons of oil, and that's maybe well be where the biggest impact is. You know, as I said, which half of your television sets and which half of your wardrobe and which half of your cars and everything else are you willing to get rid of? And that may be forced upon us just by the decrease.
Question I've been given is, given the global challenge of peak oil, what could an international organization such as the World Bank or the IMF do? And this is from Charles Schlumberger in the World Bank. I don't think that the sort of the finance world has too much to offer in solving these problems. It's not lack of money which is causing the problems. It's not that there are countries or companies which have access to huge reserves and would like to develop them but can't because they haven't got the money. It's the opposite. I mean, something like $1 trillion a year is flowing into the Middle East currently basically because of US imports of Middle East oil. They're not short of money. I think there are some world organizations which are eventually going to have to help with dealing with this, but it's going to be the UN. It's not going to be the World Bank, and it'll be the UN because we'll see disorder, we'll see wars, we'll see all sorts of unpleasant events. We'll see famine. We're already seeing in parts of Africa that electrical power is only available for 2, 3, 4 hours a day because those countries can't afford to buy crude. I was in Dubai a couple of weeks ago, and I noticed in the local newspaper a very small piece of information, but it said that the UAE had given an interest-free loan of, I think, about $20–30 million. It wasn't very much, but to several small African countries so that they could buy crude. Their power stations had closed down. These are the sort of problems we're dealing with. So it's not the lack of money. It's not lack of money which is driving development. The World Bank and the IMF may well have a role in helping small countries buy crude, but are those countries ever going to be able to pay the money back? I'd have my doubts.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to wrap at this time. I'd like you to thank our speakers.